In a joint article, the heads of the CIA and MI6 have warned that the world order is under threat in a way we have not seen since the Cold War. Writing in the Financial Times ahead of their joint appearance at the paper's Weekend Festival today, Sir Richard Moore and Bill Burns warned that Russia was sabotaging Europe. And I'm joined on the programme by Colonel Simon Diggins, OBE, defence analyst. Thank you very much indeed, Simon, for joining me. I mean, obviously this is alarming to the max. How alarming is the threat, and how right are they in alerting us to it?
Well, Vanessa, good afternoon to you. I think the answer is alarming, and as the paper pointed out, it's extremely unusual for the heads of both MI6 and CIA to appear together,
yes,
and make a joint statement. So the theatre of the occasion should not be underestimated. This is clearly a very serious warning from very serious people, and they're right. The result of not just the threat we're seeing from Putin in Russia, and both the CIA and MI6 highlighted as well what they call the reckless sabotage orchestrated by Russia across Europe. But they also highlighted China as the strategic challenge of the 21st century, and indeed the rising Islamist threat, including our old friend the Islamic State, which doesn't seem to have disappeared. So it was a very thorough but very alarming report by them, but I think we should take it extremely seriously.
Yes, well, it is so alarming. Honestly, it sends quite justifiable, shivers down the spines of anybody who couldn't take time to think about it seriously, because contemplating it is almost unconscionable. The question, though, I suppose, is what we as a country are supposed to do about it, or indeed what the West is supposed to do about it.
Well, I think the basic answer is recognise that the situation has changed. I mean, I think we all hoped at the end of the Cold War. I mean, it unfairly described, but it was the end of history. The global liberal order had triumphed. Soviet communism was dead, and while it might take a few countries like China to sort of come into line, the assumption was that the Western style liberal democratic order was the way ahead, and
yes,
other countries would make it. That's completely fallen apart, and so we need to recognise we're not just in a bipolar world. That's gone. I don't even think we're in a kind of multipolar world. We're in a world of a myriad of different threats, and people who are our friends for one thing, and let's not forget we have a massive trade deals with China, are also strategic challenges. So we need to be very agile and also very strong in our defence and our security. And this is the really hard thing for us. So we're simply not.
Well, I mean, we're having this conversation about a threat to the world order on the very day that the Daily Mail's headline front page is none of our attack submarines at
Absolutely.
sea, utterly dire state of Royal Navy laid bare in shocking figures. That's not a juxtaposition you want to be happening, is it?
No, not at all. And you could say the same thing across the other armed forces, sadly.
Yes.
We have an army that's hemorrhaging people faster than it can recruit them. The RAF can't train enough people. It's had to close down various bits of its capability. And what we've had over years is this promise of kind of jam tomorrow, that sometime in the 2030s, 2035, this amazing bit of kit will or will not come into place. We need strong defence now. And that's the real blunt thing about it. And that's why, while I understand exactly why Labour as a new government, after sort of years of Tory government, would want to have a strategic defence review. To be honest, we know what their problems are. We know what the solutions are. We've had 4 strategic defence reviews in the last 10 years. Strategic, not just sort of tactical, quick look at what's going on. Strategic defence reviews. We understand the situation, but the unpalatable truth is, if we want to have the kind of security and defence we need to spend more money. And the start point is the 2.5% of GDP, not in some sort of never land is where we are with Labour at the moment, but within a fixed time frame. And frankly, the sooner the better. And let's get to 3%, which is probably where we need to be really quickly as well.
However, realistically, you're speaking to me and I'm speaking to you in a climate where one of the subjects we're going to be discussing in the third hour of this programme is the kiboshing of the pensioners' winter fuel allowance. And so many people have felt this was, a paltry sum that makes an enormous difference to a vulnerable sector of our society. And yet somehow or other, a Labour government has deemed that the right area to start cost cost cutting while awarding pay increases to those in the public sector. But what I'm saying is, with this level of kind of cheese paring, this level of, cutting down the minutiae, you can't realistically expect an investment in defence, can you? How can you possibly, particularly when we're talking about, our rivers and seas being pumped full of sewage? Lots of people saying the right thing to do is for the government, of course, to nationalise all the different water companies, and the immediate response, well, they won't, because it's much too expensive. So if clean water's too expensive, if warm pensioners are too expensive, how is anybody going to think, okay, and give a tick to investing in defence in the way that you think should happen?
I don't underestimate at all the difficulty of the politics of the thing. I mean, I'd make two arguments. Firstly, you have to pay, which means we would actually have to increase taxes. But the point is, you could say is, actually, it's recognised what the threat is. And we then ask ourselves the question then is, well, what happens if we don't pay? What happens if we don't look after our security? And then we start to see where the consequences are. We see it increase in terms of sabotage. We've seen warehouse attacks in East London. We've seen endless cyber attacks by Russia. We've had attempted assassinations of interior ministers in Estonia. And very interesting, this goes back to some of the real challenges. We've also seen, and this has happened in Germany recently, deliberate attempts by Soviet intelligence to destabilize society. Mm-hmm. So what they then do is they've been identifying people who they see as vulnerable, playing on their fears, playing on the kind of race card, and trying to destabilize society. So the consequence of us not defending ourselves properly against people like Russia, people like Putin, is that we will get more of that. And the costs of then remediating that challenge, indeed, if we even survived it as a society, are significantly greater than the costs of increasing taxation. I can't think any other way of doing it. Increasing taxation to pay for our defence and for our security. It's not an easy way out. But I think this kind of sort of promise that somehow we'd get the money through growth when there's no real obvious way to kind of get growth just simply won't wash. And that might take 5, might take 10 years. The challenge is now we've had the prime ministers of all the Baltic states and the Polish prime minister saying basically that Russia is prepared to challenge NATO within the next 3 to 5 years. Yes. Now that takes us from now through to 2030. And that's way outside. That's way inside. Sorry, the timeline that Starmer and this defence review are looking at. So the challenge is now, and the response needs to be now, not in some fictional time in the future where we may or may not have had growth in order to pay for defence.
And just one further question, and I'm not expecting a neat and sharp answer to this, but what will war, should we become embroiled in it, look like then? Because, what's going on in the Middle East doesn't resemble any kind of war that's recognisable to most of us. And what's gone on in various other countries in the world has been a kind of form of warfare that we don't know and that isn't familiar to us. So when it comes to investing in defence, are there altogether different investments that need to be made, not the traditional ones?
You need both, and I think that's one of the things that came out from the article from the heads of CIA and MI6. They talked about the balance between traditional forces and also being able to counter these other forms of threat. And indeed, people, if they want to put it in a big bucket category, talk about grey warfare, grey zone warfare, and that's all that whole mix of social media, sabotage, destabilization, cyber attacks, intelligence, surveillance, all those things. And we need all of that and more. But we also need to have traditional forces because war is still a war amongst the peoples. You need to be able to convince people to fight, and you need to be able to fight and to hold ground or to deal with enemy threats from the air or from the sea. So we need it all. I mean, and you say it's not a neat and easy answer to it. But if you're looking for sort of examples of what it would look like, yes, bits of what's going on in Ukraine are very much in that way, whether it be drone warfare, intelligence, cyber, and everything, but also what we've seen in the Israel-Gaza conflict as well. So we, like all these things, like the new is being born, even as the old still exists, and we're starting to see and understand what a future warfare would look like in the next few years. Hybrid warfare, grey warfare, air zone warfare, whatever term you choose to use. Yes. But we're starting to understand and see what that would look like. But it's expensive.
Colonel, thank you very much indeed. Colonel Simon Diggins, OB.